All right. Hello everybody. Uh, this is a special type of topic we have on JM's channel. We're going to talk about the history of Puerto Rican wrestling in English. It's been very well documented in Spanish. Um, you know, um, but not a lot of people in the U.S. or Canada or Europe
Pretty
or
much
any English. Yeah,
outside of Puerto Rico.
yeah, outside of Puerto Rico, the island of Puerto Rico. uh, know about the rich history of Puerto Rican wrestling, which is very influential in many ways.
Go on. I just love the praise.
Oh, sorry about that. Somebody came in my room. Was asking
Oh,
some. Yeah, my,
yeah, no
my bad.
problem.
Uh,
You can just edit this out in post production.
yeah, yeah. As I was saying earlier, the history of Puerto Rican wrestling is influential in many ways. Uh, a lot of people when they think of Puerto Rican wrestling, they think of Los Boricuas in the WWF, but there's more than that. Even though those guys are great, especially Hurricane Castillo. Love Hurricane Castillo.
It's Sabio
Hurricane
Vega.
Castillo, Sabio Vega, Miguelito Perez Jr. Jesus. Keep forgetting his name. The last one. Uh,
Jesus
yeah.
Estrada.
Hey, yeah, Jesus Estrada. Um, a lot of people just think of that, and they don't really know a lot other than that. And with other than
Okay.
the hold on, Zach, I'm doing the intro. Other than the fact that Bruiser Brody was murdered down there, that's what a lot of other people know about it as well. But there's more than that as well. Uh, it's very influential. It spans from Japan to Canada to America. It's very influential. So we'd like to thank Gunslinger, who is a Boricua who's been watching a lot of this stuff. So we'd like to thank him for informing us about this.
You're welcome.
So if let me start with this. So when did Puerto Rican wrestling really develop itself on the island itself? Because there's Puerto Rican wrestlers wrestling in New York and other territories before that. But when did it really start on the island itself?
Oh God. Well, there'd been a lot of attempts over the years to get some kind of wrestling on the island. It had always been brought in as a sort of featured attraction. I think at first it started somewhere around the '60s. There was a couple of American promoters that had brought some stars over, but it never came about of anything. At that time, boxing was really popular. And really, it was only in one particular town because nowhere else had the kind of facilities to kind of have that kind of sport. So wrestling was sort of largely just like this circus act at first, but then somewhere around the '70s is when it starts to kind of become a little more frequent. Um, at first, it was some other American promoter that brought it. Then, if I recall, and if some of the old referees' stories, allow me to recall, it was when somewhere around the '70s when there was the first kind of consistent territory where some promoter at some time had hired a bunch of people who would go on to be referees and old timers in the company in the early '70s to try and lift the island up, but unfortunately it didn't work out. So that would lead us then later to the late '70s when an actual full-on attempt would be made.
Well, that's very interesting. So let's go into that. Let's go into that. We So the first big company that really succeeded on the island itself was WWC, or the Capital Sports Promotion. Is it's no
Correct.
early no? Yeah. So can you give us a background on who founded that? What was the reason for that? You know, um, how successful they were early on in their promoting days.
Oh goodness, this craziness.
Right. Well, okay. So later on in the 70s, when the WWF, Vince Senior's company, sort of starts to uh, kind of expand a little bit more. Um, Gorilla Monsoon at the time, he was part of the company. He ran a lot of stuff, if I recall. He had a lot of money in a lot of places that I didn't even know about, you know, but he was mostly into the New York territory.
Yeah,
So,
he's a staple of that.
yes, always. And Gorilla was a great human being. Everybody down here that, knew him personally and worked with him was always talking great, great things about him.
Yeah,
Now,
just before
yeah,
I don't want to let me interrupt you
yeah,
for a second. Just so people can know, Gorilla Monsoon. A lot of people know if they watch the WWF in like '80s and '90s, he was the commissioner. But before that, he was a actual top star in the WWF, and he was one of the top Latin talents that was a real draw. Him and oh my god, I forgot his name. I feel so stupid for forgetting his name. The other Puerto Rican, uh, Pedro Morales. Pedro
there you
Morales.
go.
I thought it's
Pedro
crazy that
Morales.
his finisher was the airplane spin.
Yeah, the airplane spin. Yep.
Wait,
Pedro
really?
Morales. Yeah, it was the airplane. Yeah, Gorilla
Huh.
Monsoon's finish was the airplane spin. They are both. Them and Bruno Sammartino were kind of the top guys because during that time in New York, there were a lot of ethnic groups, and so
Yep.
you could there's a lot of Boricuas in the South Bronx, so you can appeal to them by having a Puerto Rican wrestler, and there's a lot of Italians in New York, as everybody knows, so you can get them by having an actual Italian as a world champion. Um, so I just wanted to make that clear. Yeah,
Right.
so
Yeah.
Like the whole, like the whole. Look at that! Look at that! It's one of us succeeding.
yeah.
Exactly. That was at least the mentality behind it. So yeah, Gorilla wanted kind of to have his own little territory. He wanted somewhere where he could make a lot of money, but would be away from Florida and would be away from prying eyes. So he said, "Well, we've got a lot of Puerto Rican talent on here. A lot of that talent still roams the goddamn country to this day. Um, if I recall, one of them was Dr. Jose Estrada, father of Jesus and Jose Jr. And we'll get to them later. But Jose, from what he tells me, he knew Vince Senior as well. He got to work underneath that. That's its own kind of little story itself. But um, from what I understand, Carlos and Victor come in when Gorilla was interested in finding a sort of ethnic star that would be able to carry the territory on his back. At first, he tried Pedro, but the thing with Pedro is he never quite caught on. For some reason, everybody just didn't catch on to Pedro, probably because he was kind of more of an American phenomenon than he was a Puerto Rican one. With Carlos, however, I guess he resonated a lot more. He was a lot more. He wasn't as good as Pedro in the ring. I've seen a lot of Pedro matches over the years, and I think Pedro was a much better worker than he was. Carlos was never really that well known outside the island, if at all. He was a jobber to the stars in a lot of territories, from what I understand, and he himself was kind of looking for somewhere where he could establish his name and become a big draw, kind of like Inoki and Bob in Japan, or El Santo in Mexico. So that was the impetus to have him on top. Of course, there would be other stars that would almost sort of eclipse him a little bit, um, and we'll get to him in a minute. Victor Jovica himself, he was also a wrestler, but he had come from, I think, Croatia, if I
He's
recall.
he's not a native
No,
Puerto
no,
Rican. He's
no.
Croatian.
Yeah, he's Croatian. Still speaks the language and still speaks broken Spanish with a very thick accent. Still
From
has not
That's
learned a lot of the words and stuff.
that's hilarious. That sounds like me. So
Yeah,
Croatia,
yeah.
then Czech. Not to interrupt, but Croatia, then Czechoslovakia. Just to clarify.
no, that's
Yeah.
Yugoslavia.
Or,
I think it was part of the Eastern Bloc then, but that's not it.
Yugoslavia. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah,
my bad.
but,
Sorry, I'm a history nut.
but no, yeah, no, don't worry. So yeah, and so Victor himself not really known either, but he was enough of a businessman in the wrestling world to smooth his way in there and bought into the territory, and all three of them had a percentage. Gorilla was a bit more quiet. Meanwhile, Carlos and Victor were a lot more active because they knew the lay of the land. Uh, at that time, they had basically taken almost every Puerto Rican, if not all of them, from the New York territory. And New York at that time was really winding down from that kind of ethnic idea where you had a star for every race, right?
Mhm.
So, the Jose Estradas turned into the Super Medics, and the other stars that were there also repackaged themselves in some way, shape, or form. The Fidel Sierras of the world. Then I think you had Hurricane Castillo, father, senior. Sorry,
Yeah, Hurricane
that
Castillo steer.
yeah, he's a different animal than his son. Still a good wrestler, but he was a much different animal. Very hated heel. I believe he was actually Cuban, if I recall.
Oh, that'll
So,
definitely get you heat in Puerto Rico.
oh yeah, no, at that time, yes. But so at this time in the late '70s, Capitol is starting to gain some traction. One of its stars, though, would be part of a trio of wrestlers that would later go on to achieve great success. And uh, the first one that I'm going to mention is a man by the name of Johnny Rivera, right? So Johnny Rivera is from the island, native 100%. He had gone to New York to work in one of those. I don't want to call it a work camp. It's like what do you call it? It's like a
A,
factory where
tr-
you.
a training camp.
No, it's like it was like a factory or something, if I recall the story, where
A
he'd gone.
tryout?
No, it's not a wrestling thing. It's actually he went there for actual work, for
Oh,
to
he
work in.
went. Oh, yeah, like a job fair or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. But
For a
you
factory
know,
town.
they treated him. He didn't like it there. They treated him pretty bad. He ran off and escaped, and then apparently he was found by some local New Yorker who helped him out, gave him a ride back to the city, where he stayed with his cousin. Uh, I know, pretty crazy, but that's just his mentality then. So
Oh,
yeah, he had at first he tried to become a boxer because his brother and him were very into boxing. He was pretty good at it. But then one day he had seen somebody with a gym bag go into a room. He goes and checks it out, and it's a wrestling school, right? They had all the women wrestlers and all the men wrestlers training side by side, et cetera, et cetera. One thing led to another, and he got interested, and he became Johnny Rivera, working out of WWF. And he was so good that the Vince Senior actually said and took him aside one day and said, like, "Look, I need you to go to Japan for me. I think you do a lot of great stuff there because you're gonna be working with Baba." And Baba had actually seen him work with some of the Japanese guys. Uh, I can't remember who he had worked. I think it might have been actually. I think it might have been one of the junior heavyweights of that era. But I got to get back to you on that one. But
Maybe it was
either
Onita
way,
or Fucci.
yeah, it might have been Fuchi or Nita, but that was late '70s, early '80s, so
Yeah.
it might have been somebody else. Oh, and so with that said, he also traveled to Mexico, and that's where, and this is pretty important. At that time, he had already developed, or who would be known as Invader Number One, had already developed the name of the Invader, the mask,
Mhm.
not the design, not the design. He already had the mask thing, but um, Jose Gonzalez, Invader Number One, obviously, was also part of that trio, right?
Mhm.
So Jose Gonzalez had come up with the Invader name. He had worked it in, I think he might have started in the States as a jobber, but then he went over to Puerto Rico and started doing that. Now, Johnny was a part of that trio, and he had gone to Mexico, and they had designed the mask specifically for him because he didn't have a mask at that time. It was done
Mhm.
overnight because he had to work for the UWF at that time. There was a UWA. I can't remember the name of the company
I
now.
think it was UWA,
Yeah,
right?
there
I
you
think
go. Yeah,
that's the one with El Koenig, right? Is the one you're
yeah,
talking about? The
yeah,
UWA, yeah.
El
Yeah, I
Toreo
believe
de
that's
Cuatro
correct. Yeah.
Caminos. Yeah, that's their house, or at least it was until it was turned into a freaking highway.
Wait, what?
Yeah, yeah, they turned it into a highway afterwards.
Yeah,
Sad ending for that, but yeah,
Guess
um,
I guess they didn't have a. I guess they couldn't pay the bill.
I
yeah.
think that.
So go ahead.
Oh no, you keep going.
All right. So New York, 1970s. Uh, Apparently, and this is at least implied, Jose was kind of jealous of Johnny because Johnny got to work with Andre, and Andre liked him so much that he would just say like, "No, he's tag teaming with me tonight in Boston, in Brooklyn, or whatever other place you could have with a lot of Puerto Ricans, Spanish Harlem, etc." So Johnny Rivera was pretty much teaming with Andre for a long time. Jose didn't like that at all. Jose thought that he should be in the spotlight. Of course, that would cost him dearly a lot later on because his ego would get in the way. And if you saw the Dark Side of the Ring thing with Brody and him, I've never really read too much into that story because I never actually heard it up until then. But it might be true because, and as we'll get on later, he'll be a recurring character in this story.
Yeah, he becomes
So
very influential in WWC.
You know, the
so
weird
yeah,
thing is, but question though, what made
yeah.
Invader number one stab Bruiser Brody to begin with? Like, what did Brody do to make
We'll,
Invader number
we'll,
one do that?
we'll talk about that later, JM.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
That's a little later in the '80s. This is the early '70s.
All right, I got another
All right.
question.
Yeah.
I got another question before we move on. You mentioned in the that those three had a percentage. Do you know who had what percentage of the company?
Well, from what I understand, Victor and Carlos had a majority share. Gorilla was largely a money man. Then Gorilla, somewhere around, I guess, the late '80s, kind of turned away from the Puerto Rican territory because Puerto Rico had this thing where, for some reason, it, there was a couple of points where it was up and down, and it would just go away and then come back really fast. A lot of that was due to booking decisions. Other times it was because the economy was kind of, going nuts. Other times it was because stupid decisions were made. But it had this just absolute amazing ability to just bounce back. It was ridiculous. So Gorilla Monsoon kind of saw that, and I guess he said, "Well, my money's safer somewhere else, and I don't have too many years left on this planet Earth. I'm already an old man, so I might as well cash out." So he left the territory to Carlos, Victor, and I think that's it. Because
Yeah.
Carlos and Victor really didn't want anybody else. Carlos had an ego, still to this day has an ego. So go figure.
Now, real quick, just just to clarify, for people who don't know who don't automatically know who you're talking about, when when you say Carlos, you mean Carlos Colon.
Yeah, Carlos Colon.
Correct.
The Carlos Colon, the father of Carlito and uh, Eddie, or is it Orlando? He's the father of.
It's Eddie Cologne, and then Orlando's the cousin.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, all right. Yeah. All right. All right. Now we
That's
can.
just wanted to clarify for other people who didn't know who we were talking about.
Yeah, Victor Jovica and Carlos Colon. If that's what we're talking
Yeah.
about. All right. All right. Please continue.
All right. So uh, Jose Gonzalez, Vader number one. Now we get into the big Invader number one thing. So he starts off as a heel. He becomes kind of a pretty big attraction at the time. Starts getting booked. Starts getting a lot more popular than he would have in New York. A lot of it has to do with his style of working. In Puerto Rico, it's not the wrestling that's important. It is important to be trained, but it's not really very important to the fans. It kind of bores the brakes off of him. Still to this day, you'll get a lot of great workers, but a lot of fans really don't care about that. What they care about, however, is the brawl, the blood, the violence. Because Puerto Rico, you have to understand, still very much a very violent place. They still want a lot of that barbed wire, steel chair,
Fire.
blast, fire, light tubes, that kind of stuff. Like
Yeah.
yeah, I'll always say, like, if you had a deathmatch promotion from Japan over here, you'd make millions.
Yeah,
uh,
definitely. Yeah, a lot of people just assume Puerto Rico, because it's a Spanish-speaking place, would be similar to Mexico, and it's very not, because Mexico and Puerto Rico in their style of wrestling is very different. They're very divergent. Um, you know, there's definitely some influence in Puerto Rico of lucha libre, but it's very different.
Uh,
well, the thing is, in the Caribbean, it's very much like that. But then when you go to Central and South America, there's a lot more Mexican influence.
Mhm.
Colombia had wrestling for a time. Argentina had wrestling for a time. Although theirs was really wild and fucking crazy. I think Panama had more influence from Mexico, and they had their own stars, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
hey,
Anyway,
Because when I was watching those tapes, there weren't a lot of, like you said, there weren't a lot of wrestling. There was a lot of punching, kicking, elbow,
biting,
headbutt, biting.
bite. Yeah,
bikes.
yeah. It's if you guys like, if you guys are fans of like that Memphis style brawl, or
Yeah.
like that Texas style brawling, you will love Puerto Rican wrestling. I mean, it just goes 0 to 60 really fast. Like it goes really fast into like brawling. Like,
Like
and there's blood all the time.
Yeah.
like real
Pretty
like
much.
real like real quick. Can can I share a crazy moment from a tape we were watching on YouTube?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
So, Boris, you know exactly where I'm going with this. But we were watching a match. I forget who was in it at this big ass baseball stadium, and out of nowhere, I catch it, but then I had to rewind it for them. I'm like, I'm like, holy shit, that's a gun. A random member of the crowd just from nowhere pulls a
Hold on.
45 out of his pants.
Yeah, somebody definitely flashed. He didn't use it, thank God. But somebody, I think he was just doing the macho thing. It's like, hey, I got this gun right here. I'm a big dog. You know what I mean?
My
I'm the big
my
dog right here. You know?
machismo, bro.
Yeah, I'm the big dog, right? So he pulls out like a it might be like a 38 or 45, and just starts waving it around, and then puts it back in his pants. So you know, yeah, but
Oh,
please, oh yeah, keep,
no,
Yeah,
yeah,
that was a
you'll
bit of
see
a
a lot.
holy shit.
yeah, you
No,
see
yeah,
it.
you'll see a lot of that, and there's a lot more crazy stories to get into. But moving on. So Vader number one gets booked as a heel. He starts gaining some momentum. He becomes the number two to Carlos. Um, in either heel or face, because really once he turns face, that's when the height of his popularity is peaked. My dad used to tell me stories. He used to watch the Invaders on TV all the time when he was a kid, and when he was older, of course. And he would say, like, they were like one of the most over tag teams you'll ever see, along with the Super Medics and the Bushwhackers, who were the sheep herders or the
Sheep
shepherds or whatever.
herders. Sheep
Yeah,
herders,
there
Yeah.
you
yeah.
go. The sheep herders were huge, and Luke Williams for a while lived on the island in the 2000s. Um, and if I recall, there was also the Hangman, but they come in later in the 90s. Road Warriors were really, really huge, and would just wreck everybody. But they came really rare.
Yeah.
There's
The Road Warriors were big everywhere they went.
oh yeah, no, not just in size, but in popularity. I mean, they looked
Yeah,
amazing.
I mean, when you see somebody like, okay, so this is a
I
little bit
didn't.
off topic, but here's the thing: because tag team wrestling had been like, the typical tag team you would see, especially like in the South where they really started out, would be like the Funks, and I love the Funks. The Funks are great. They're icons. They're Texas legends. But
Yeah,
when you see the Funks, and then you see some hawking animal in face paint and leather chaps and spikes with and they are just destroying jobbers. They're
pretty much.
destroying these jobbers like nobody's business. Like, they're beating them up. They're throwing them out the ring. They're just like, you know what? You're not even good enough to be. They're like a Mad Max character. Like, that's what they're based on. They're based on like the Road Warriors. Like, that's what they
Oh
are,
yeah.
and they're whipping ass. So somebody from Puerto Rico who's never seen these people, or somebody from Japan who's never seen anybody like this come in the ring and demolish somebody in like 30 seconds flat. They're just an icon of wrestling. Yeah, but
Period.
yeah,
No, yeah.
period.
The coolest thing was I used to train in one of the gyms here, and there was a referee by the name of El Vikingo, the Viking, right?
Hmm.
So El Vikingo's from El Salvador. There was wrestling in Salvador once upon a time, and fun fact about El Salvador, it was so real to them that they actually gave you a scholarship to train in wrestling.
Wait,
So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, no, it's
Whoa.
crazy.
holy
that's
crap!
Yo, that's nuts.
that's really keeping kayfabe. Okay,
Yeah,
so yeah,
yeah,
that's amazing.
yeah. So Vikingo had about three pictures that were blown up. These really old pictures too, that were hanging on the wall of his gym at all times. The first one was Ric Flair and him. The other one was the Road Warriors and him in the middle, and I think the last one was him and Terry Funk, and it was just he had like the face where he's going all batshit, and he's got the bull rope around his neck. It was just great. But yeah, no, next to him, he make like they make
Nope,
sorry, sorry about that.
no problem.
So yeah, they look. I mean, they look absolutely monstrous next to him. But going back to, of course, the history. So the invaders get over, the super medics get over, uh, and so the '70s kind of established Capital as the big leading, dominant promotion. Now, towards the end of the '70s, what happened was Pedro had still been on the island. He was kind of Carlos' number two babyface, along with Gorilla and Jovica booking all the stuff, right?
Mhm.
So Pedro is not happy about the fact that he's getting booked underneath. He was promised a lot of money. He thought he was going to be a big star. He had been the world champion over in New York. What happened? So Carlos really doesn't want to give. He does. It's not happening for him. Carlos really doesn't want to give up his spot, and so Pedro pretty much leaves Capital, finds other people, takes his own money, and makes a different company. Now, this company was running off, if I recall, off of Channel 11, whereas I think Carlos's company was running in Channel 2. I can't remember exactly if that's how it went, but Pedro was largely pretty sore about that, and he never really worked for Capital, I think, ever again after that. The company failed, at least his company, but WWC, that was its first split. It was an unsuccessful split, and then of course Pedro and everybody else that had worked there. If they didn't go back, they just didn't work at the island anymore, or they didn't work at all.
Mhm.
So that's pretty much the end of the '70s right there. The split happens, and then the '80s go in. Business is kind of down, but then it gets back up when, if I recall, they start bringing in a lot more foreign stars, a lot more Ric Flairs, a lot more Giant Babas. Uh, Abdullah turns the island into a massive hotbed of blood and violence.
Yeah,
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. Wherever he goes, there's blood and there's violence. So
oh
you
yeah,
know, we before you continue, we gotta say that Puerto Rico, before the Brody incident, really was a hotbed
could
for
you give me a
foreign
minute?
talent. Oh, what did you say?
Could you give me a minute? I'll be right back.
Oh, no problem. All right, yeah. Um, Puerto Rico in the '80s, the early '80s, was a hotbed for foreign talent to come. Like, it was on par almost to Japan. As a place where foreigners would go. Like, you would see Ric Flair, um, Abdullah, Bruiser Brody, the Road Warriors, come to this small island and get good money,
Did,
and the crowds were hot. Like, they were very hot. They were very, uh, you know, uh, they're very, 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 very excited to see this. And it really became a place where, if you wanted to make some money and you didn't want to you didn't want to have to get a passport, you could go to Puerto Rico because if people don't know this, Puerto Rico is technically a United States territory, so you don't need to. So when you fly into Puerto Rico, you don't need a passport. You don't need a work visa.
I
You know,
think
every citizen in Puerto Rico is a U.S. citizen. So
uh,
yeah.
real quick, Boris. I think while there's still a territory of the U.S., I think some years ago they changed it to where you do need a you
No,
do need a passport in now.
no, that's not true. That's not true. I've looked it up. It's not true.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why do you need a passport if everybody's a U.S. citizen?
Oh, oh yeah, yeah, you're right. I, I just thought they changed it. My mistake.
No, Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. Same with Guam. Same with American Samoa. They use the dollar. Um,
Yep.
yeah, right there. Doug posted no mic chat. Um, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Um, uh, yeah. So it is. It's just like okay. Gunslinger's back.
Yeah.
Welcome
Sorry
back.
about that.
No
I'll
problem.
be doing that a little bit later because somebody went to pick somebody up, and so yeah.
Oh
So
no problem.
yeah. So I hope you guys can edit this out because I'll be call awkward and stuff. All right. Where were we?
We were talking about the early '80s.
Born
Oh
into
yeah.
the 80s.
Right. So we go into the 80s now. The territory had, like I said before, had this miraculous ability to go up and down and recover from any kind of snag on the road. But at this time in the 80s, it would experience its most consistent level of growth and spectacular success. Now, like I said before, they had brought in the formula of let's get a foreigner to come in and badmouth the Islanders, and that way we can, get heat on him and whatever, and we can bring in Carlos as the big, baby face.
Yeah, to
Uh,
kick their ass.
yeah. So they started to apply that logic to everybody on the call. What they would do is the invaders would be feuding with, let's say, the Fantastics, the Sheepherders, let's see, the Funks, maybe. Maybe they'll feud with the Supermedics, right? Or maybe the Supermedics will feud with I don't know, some other monster tag team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if I recall correctly, at this time there was a lot of tag team tournaments too because tag team wrestling on the island had gotten so hot because of the Invaders and the Supermedics and of Carlos teaming up with other stars from Mexico and the States. Sometimes they would they'd bring in a Mexican or two, but they were really never successful. They would bring Mil Masters every now and then, the Scars, all these guys, the villains, the villanos. Sorry. Uh, and so as the hot tag team boom had started, so had the Invaders turned face, the Supermedics turned face because now everybody was feuding with a lot of foreigners. You know, the big three that I always say were part of that boom were Abdullah, Ric Flair, because he would come in and the territory would just be absolutely I'd blow the hell up. And Brody. Brody are the most. There's three of the most recognizable names. Stan Hansen would come in every now and then. He'd be probably one of the best, foreign heels that we'd have. But he didn't come in that frequently. But when
My
he did,
man.
yeah. But when he came in, he was cowboy killing everybody.
Yep.
He's John Wayne with the gun, but he's the bad guy of the film.
Yep.
Uh, um, Brody, when he came in, he stayed for a long time, and he'd be a staple of the company to the point where you'd have to turn him face. He's kind of a prelude to what stuff in the future with IWA would be with Shane and a few other foreigners that would come in and set up shop and say like, "Wow, I really like it here," and as well as Rick would come in, but he would also work the Dominican Republic, and he'd set the place on fire over there in
I
more than
mean, it
one
was
way.
even crazier in the Dominican Republic than it was in Puerto Rico
No,
because
no.
they thought, like Rick. if people haven't heard this story, Rick went over there, and I think he challenged, or Jack Vidal challenged him for the NW
Yeah,
title, right?
yeah.
And
Well, the story was okay. The story was Jack Venom, Jack Veneno in Spanish. Uh, he was biggest Dominican wrestling star. He is to them what Carlos is to us.
Mhm.
So Jack comes up with a finish. All right, okay, you're gonna get the NWA championship off of me like this. We're gonna turn off the lights at the end of the match right as the referee is counting me three. But when we turn off the lights, you're gonna leave the ring. Like you're gonna leave town and you're never gonna come back. And that actually was a thing. He never came back because the Dominican Republic would actually like the people actually called the cops and everything and said like, no, you got to find him. He's a thief. We got to bring him to justice. Um, and of course, Jack Veneno became a big star and even got like an honorary position as like a sports commissioner or something. I don't remember. But yeah, that was that whole fiasco. There's a few other stories from the Dominican Republic from other people, but I don't know too much about that. I know
yeah,
I know a few stars, but I don't know too much about the Dominican Republic.
yeah.
So
Uh,
yes, we're in the middle of the '80s, right?
mhm.
All right, so
They were willing to kill him.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
They were about ready to pull guns on them.
Like the
right.
if you guys ever saw The Hobbit, and if you remember how when Gollum was yelling out thieves, remember that? He's like yelling out thieves. That's what
Oh
they were
yeah.
doing. Player ran away. They're like thieves in collective.
See, it's like the Frankenstein movie where it's like the pitchforks and torches with the villagers going up the hill. There you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
So okay, so moving a little bit into the middle of the '80s, and of course some of the other talent that came in. Um, while Texas would bring in a lot of foreign talent, one of the talent that a lot of people like to bring in were the Japanese guys. People here love the Japanese guys because they bring in the ninja stuff, and because Bruce Lee and the '80s action movie boom was so popular on the island, because sex, violence, and drugs, fucking, that sells movie tickets. Come on.
Yep.
So, uh, the first couple of promotions to kind of bring their foreign to bring their talent over here because uh, they would bring in their young lions or they would bring in their undercard guys, to kind of set up shop and say, hey, okay, we'll show you around the island so you can show other people around the island. Hiroshi Hase was one of those people later on, but there was also Onita.
What the heck?
Yeah, Onita was very, he was a jobber at the island. He had started in Memphis and he'd come over here too. Fuji was also around here a couple of times. Um, oh, of course, uh, I don't remember if he was around, but I think Kabuki might have been somewhere around the early '80s. Uh,
I don't think he
uh,
was around in Puerto Rico. He was mostly focused on the world
yeah,
class
yeah.
territory.
I might be confusing him with Kendo Nagasaki then.
Yeah, I think you're confusing him with Kendo Nagasaki. Yeah.
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 Kendo was around, and of course, Mr. Pogo, he even lived on the island, and he even worked at a factory, I think, mixing cement and stuff.
Legend.
Yeah, no, he liked it here. He really did, and I don't blame him. But uh, he couldn't find work apparently, and things were pretty bad for the wrestling. So he decided, all right, I'm going to leave. Plus, the economy's kind of going to the hell.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, Keiji Muto, a super black ninja, or young
Actually,
Keiji Muto. Oh
oh
yeah.
yeah, I'm about to get to that. So how does Keiji Muto end up here? Well, Keiji had started it's in New Japan, of course. Everybody knows the story. He ends up here apparently because he had worked in Texas. He had worked somewhere in Florida, if I recall, with Eddie Graham's territory. And he came down here because he liked the style. He wanted to incorporate that into his wrestling because he was, very spectacular in the ring, but he needed a lot more brawling. At this time, he didn't have the great Muda name. Gary Hart's, I guess, had an influence to,
Yeah,
he had, yeah,
Gary
Gary
Hart
had,
Gary Hart
yeah,
gave him that name because what they did in NWA was they billed him because Gary Hart was also the manager of Great Kabuki and World Class, right? So they
yeah,
gave him that name to say, well, this is the next coming of the great Kabuki. This is his son, and watch what he. That's why he spit the mist and do all that stuff. But they were not related.
Yeah, it was that Gary needed like a new. They wanted to turn Kabuki face, but they wanted to turn him face with a new star. And they said, okay, we need somebody younger, and so we'll give him the Great Muda name. We'll give him the dust. He already had the face paint here.
Yeah.
Because he had the white face paint with like the kanji on his cheeks, but he hadn't fully fleshed it out.
But it
and
wasn't. Sorry,
it's okay.
Interrupt
But he
you,
wasn't the Great Muda just yet. He was the super black ninja. And he was, I think, one of the first of the Three Musketeers to come down here.
Yeah,
The
all three of them came down eventually.
Yeah, all three of them came down eventually.
Tell me what, Shinya Hashimoto was down there, like Kisagiri chopping people?
Yeah, probably.
Yo!
Yeah, that funny. If you guys don't know this, but that's how they had been friends in the dojo before that, New Japan. But that's when they said, "We are the Three Musketeers. We are the future of New Japan." That was in Puerto Rico. They said that. They did that.
Yeah.
That's where they got the name.
Yeah, that's where they got the name. They had come here to work the island and kind of, I guess Chono actually, if you think about it, Chono kind of, after he reinvented himself after the neck injury, I think that's where he understood, like, yeah, okay, I can use what I learned in Puerto Rico with the brawling and the kicking and, working a more character-driven style, as opposed to the really technical style that he had. That's the importance of that trip. But in Hashimoto's case, he was stuck with kind of a lame gimmick. He was Hashif Khan, if I recall.
Yeah, he got that gimmick in like Canada or something. Also, can we before we move on? I just want to say, Calgary Stampede Wrestling has some terrible gimmicks for Japanese wrestlers, like the Viet Cong Express. That's terrible. Stu Hart, you should feel ashamed of yourself. That was terrible. Anyway, move on. Yeah.
I mean, coming from a guy who like lived through all the 1900 stuff, well, whatever. But
yeah,
it was ridiculous. And I think he revived it one last time in 01 just as a mockery.
Yeah, just as like a tribute.
Yeah, and so the Three Musketeers are born here. Onita is obviously, he gets the barbed wire and the death matches idea here. Maybe he also gets, some of the presentation of the wrestling, because wrestling here had a really, I want to say dry kind of local style presentation. Really, really DUI kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'll be right back.
No problem. So the Three Musketeers went down there on excursion pretty much, and they learned a lot. Keiji Muto probably learned the blade down there the most.
Boy, you funny for that.
You sure he didn't learn it from the American Dream? You see there, Daddy?
No, he
all I
learned
gotta do is take this blade from between your fingertips and give yourself a little slaps.
I don't know, but yeah, Super Black Ninja, early proto Great Muda gimmick. Hashi Khan, a terrible gimmick. Too hard. You suck. It makes gimmicks for Japanese. Hiroshi Hase was down there in like '86 before the Viet Cong Express. I wonder why that gimmick never made an appearance in Japan Jam. I wonder why.
Inoki's like, wait, what?
Yeah, we're not Vietnamese. What? Yeah.
Stu Hart is like, I don't know what a Japanese wrestler is. You are now Vietnamese.
Yeah,
the Vietnam War is going on, so you're going to be a Vietnamese sympathizer.
The Vietnam War was over with this. But
this is Stu Hart. You never know. This is Stu Hart we're talking about. You never know.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So, yeah, you get down there. A young Kensuke Sazaki was there.
Sorry.
Oh, welcome back.
All right. Kensuke Sazaki was also here. As I said later, Hase came in the 90s, but that's a little bit later. And really, it would kind of kick off a tradition where a lot of these Japanese guys would come in. They would have at least one or two Japanese guys that would work in the island or in Mexico, if you're, Akamura. And they would sort of be ambassadors for the brand. Mm-hmm. Now, that at least was the Japanese side of things. When we get into some of the other notable stuff from that middle of the period, you had the famous Abdullah versus Carlos feud that drew in thousands and thousands of dollars. And when I mean thousands, I mean the company basically built its foundation off of that feud. Now, Abby in the 70s had come a couple of times. He had been something of a special attraction, but he had never stayed consistently. In the 80s, that changed. That's when they started to bring him in a lot more. They had him do a lot of these, these killer goddamn matches with a lot of barbed wire, a lot of blood, and the fork, of course.
It
Yep.
is
The
great.
fork the fork thing came about because he used to stab Carlos in the head all the time, and a lot of people concluded that because he stabbed Carlos in the head all the time with the fork, he cut his head to such a degree that it looked like a giant beefsteak,
Oh, Jesus.
which is where he gets.
What did you say, Jam?
No, I was like, oh, Jesus. So when he
Yeah.
described
Yeah,
his head being carved to the point where it's like a steak.
Yeah,
yeah,
if you see Carlos Colon's head now, it looks like a damn basketball. It
yeah.
looks like a basketball.
It looks like a pigskin, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It's
of course, it's not because he got carved with a goddamn butcher fork. It's because of the years of blading. He
yeah,
blade all the
blading.
time.
Yeah, Puerto Rico. If you go to Puerto Rico, blading is a requirement. Just it
Oh
is
They
yeah,
what it is.
love
If
to
you don't want
blade.
if you don't want to blade, don't go down there.
yeah. You'll blade at least once in your career down here.
Yeah,
At least once. I'll
And
guarantee you.
and if you're not gonna blade, Abby's gonna damn well make sure you're bleed.
yeah,
Yeah, at least at that at
Are
that
you are
period.
you sure? You sure? Do you want? Are you sure? Don't you want me to do it, brother? I could give you. I could give you. I have customized
No, no, no.
blades. I can slice you up real nice.
He talks like this. He has a really high pitched voice. He talks like this all the time.
yeah,
Sounds just a little bit like the Dusty Rhodes accent, but without the lisp.
yeah, yep.
Oh, holy vocal dissonance, Batman.
Right. Which is why, actually, speaking of which, another big star heel. I almost forgot to mention these guys. Managers, managers, managers. Managers down here are some of the most recognizable people. In fact, there is one who made it into the local slang / vocabulary because he was so goddamn evil. My man, the dude that I absolutely love to go back and watch a lot because he had absolutely one of the best microphone abilities on the goddamn island, Chicky Star. And there's a
Yes,
word,
Tiki Star.
yeah, yeah, there is a word in slang in barrio vocabulary that it describes dealing Chicky Star is the sentence, right? But it has to do with dealing in bad ways, dealing in drugs, dealing in crime, because Chicky Star was like that.
He was just
That's how
such an
popular.
evil son of a bitch.
Exactly, and you still hear it every now and then. Um, and Chicky had started out with another guy who was his tag team partner back in the day. Uh, he used to be called, in Mexico at least, the Corsair, but we know him as El Profe, the professor in English. El Profe is known as that because El Profe is just a goddamn wrestling machine. He was the better of the two in terms of technical and all these other stuff, all these other abilities. Chicky was more of a microphone, more of a Puerto Rican style wrestler. Not to say he didn't do that. He didn't know that. It's just that he knew he had a lot more money to make with that than he did with the technical stuff. Now, Profe, on the other hand, became a really popular heel manager as opposed to a wrestler because he would manage all of the big names that would come in. Now he would manage if Chicky wasn't managing Abdullah as a way of proxy feuding with either Carlos or Invader, or he's feuding with Brody, or he's feuding with some other guy. He would manage some of the other talent. He'd manage Stan Hansen. He would manage Giant Baba because he was really good with the Japanese. He would manage Mr. Pogo and his eventual tag team partner, guy that I'm going to get to in a minute, Savio Vega, who was at that time TNT. And they would make together the Ninja Express, which was a really great tag team. They were really good together. A lot of people know Pogo for the death matches, but back in the day, Pogo could go in a ring and he could go for a decent amount of time. Um, of course, that changed obviously when he wind down a bit because of all the injuries, but that's neither here nor there. So Profe and Chicky were really the mainstay bad guys, bad guy managers, and bad guy wrestlers in general of the mid card and upper card. Whereas Invader would switch around every now and then, or they would switch around one of the Invaders, except number three, he was smaller, he was a lot more sympathetic, he was a great wrestler, not too great in the promos, but he could get by at least. Number two was more of a muscle guy. He was the powerhouse of the three, and then number one was just like the face of the group.
The
But he
one
was
the one nobody likes because he's a
yeah,
asshole
and
fucking.
and yeah, no, he nobody really liked him backstage. He had an ego. Um, but I we'll get to that in when we hit the late '80s. Now I haven't done enough of a service to my man Dr. Estrada. The super medics, right? Super medic number one, or whatever you want to call him in English or Spanish. He was a jobber to the stars in the old WWF, but he by the way he worked with a lot of the. There's actually a match with him and Tiger Mask in the WWE channel on YouTube if you ever want to see.
What?
Yeah, that's him, Jose Estrada. Um, and he worked with everybody. He worked with Chavo Senior. He worked with Tiger Mask number one, the original, 100%. He worked with, if I recall, a lot of the Mexicans that came in. He worked Hector. He worked everybody, just everybody that could come in. So he was probably one of the best physiques at that time. So they decided, okay, he's not really working under his regular name. Let's give him the mask. And they came up with the Super Medic because El Medico in Mexico was really popular, and they couldn't give him the Medico Asesino gimmick because that was already being used in Mexico too. So they concluded, all right, let's give him the Super Medic. Let's give him a tag team partner, which may have been some foreign guy Doctor. Sorry, so Super Medic number two, but I forget his name, unfortunately. I know it was a foreign, I know it was an American guy. It must have been because I recall he might have either passed away or somebody was talking to him. I can't remember. So sorry about that. But they were a really great tag team. He did a lot of the work in the ring. The other guy was more of the powerhouse. That's how a lot of tag teams worked in Puerto Rico because sometimes the guys would be smaller. Of course, that would change later on, but we'll get to them too. And when we hit the 2000s, so those two would pretty much be one of the big money drawing tag teams down here, and they would be mainstays. Other guys below the card would include, but being not limited to, guys like let's say Hercules Ayala. Sorry, I'm having trouble saying these names, kind of Spanish English. So those guys would kind of be, Hurricane Castillo Sr. would be a little lower on the card, but then they'd bring him back up to be a heel. He was really hated, but then, of course, they started doing the foreigner thing, and that changed. Fidel Sierra was a famous jobber for a long time, always has been, always will be, but he was a nice hand to have. Not that great, but not that bad either. Of course, I mentioned Savio. A lot of the foreigners would also come in, the Japanese guys. The Mexican guys would come in and work with Johnny Rivera, Invader number three, as in the junior heavyweight division. A lot of the other younger stars would also work in the junior heavyweight division. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So a lot of those guys would come in, and they would be moved up the card every now and then where they would be needed if they needed to make a makeshift tag team. Of course, they would also turn them heel when I always like to call this the WWC formula. When somebody in the card that night turned babyface, somebody on the babyface side had to turn heel. And sometimes a lot of those guys would actually work better as heels, and they'd stay that way for a very long time. as is the case of Hurricane Castillo, because when they turned him face, he wasn't as good and he wasn't as popular, so they turned him back heel to feud with Invader #1, and they ended up making a lot more money with that, but they had to turn, I think, Hercules Ayala babyface, and that worked out a lot better for him because he got to be the Universal Champion, which that worked for a little bit. But then he left, of course, in the early '90s for Canada. He never came back to the territory. Um, so yeah, that was pretty much the middle of the '80s. This is their highest, drawing time. They're making thousands and thousands of dollars. They ran a 3-night anniversary show that would start a tradition where they would hold it 3 nights, but they had it at one point they had it at 3 nights in like simultaneous locations, the same night, et cetera, et cetera. It
Also, they
was like
pulled a WrestleMania too.
yeah, they had it exactly like that. It was very, I mean, it was pretty unique because they had 3 different main event / feud that were really money draws. And of course that would sell out in each location. But that was, I mean, that was at the height of their power.
Quick,
Any
quick,
questions?
quick question. I've been I've been kind of teaching myself this by watching the classics WWC YouTube channel and watching the old best of bloody tapes and the best of Bruiser Brody tapes. And I noticed that back in the old days, WWC were selling out these massive, I mean stupid huge baseball stadiums. What was the Where did they
Yep.
get that much drawing power, and does that still happen?
Well, they had that ability thanks to, first off, the booking, because the Puerto Rican fan, like I said before, this island, really, to get to the really deep center of it, this island is still very much in a kind of cultural bubble. Puerto Rico is a really violent place uh, when it comes to just social society in general. I mean, the drug and violence is part of the psyche to some degree. They're very, we're very passionate about our sports as a way of kind of distracting ourselves from the horrible stuff that happens in this island every day, or the frustrations of dealing with the politicians, or being poor in general, because that's just how it is. At least for some people. For me, at least, I got lucky. But the island likes to distract itself with soap operas. It likes movies. It likes Sylvester Stallone, or maybe they want to watch Fast and the Furious because they like cars. They're a simple people. They see sex, drugs, and violence, and they pay a ticket to watch it.
Yeah,
So Capital would bring in these amazing feuds where you would have uh, and this is another thing about their drawing power that is really important. They had for the longest time a TV slot consistently for I want to say about 40 years now on the same either. Well, I think it used to be in Channel 2, but then Channel 2 moved to Channel 4 in the '80s. So they've had that same spot for nearly 40 years now, if not 40, uh, where they would have the wrestling on at 11 o'clock sharp, finished by 12 or 1 p.m. for about, yeah, it lasts usually about an hour, hour and a half. It would end around at 1 p.m. Then you had some other movie or show come on, but they would always on the dot be there. They would have 2 or 3 matches filled with a bunch of promos where either Carlos was being the babyface and saying hello to his aunt because I want and then warning the viewers like, oh, the violent things that have been done to me. Look at my forehead. Look at my chest. Somebody set me on fire. Look at my injuries. And they would record these in studio, and it would look like the Memphis or Georgia NWA set, where they would have it like it was a sports kind of presentation where they would have the guys be interviewed as if though it was an actual legit fight. And they would cut the promos of a lifetime. I mean, you could sit down and watch these, and these guys are giving it their all. I mean, Invader number one is screaming to the world like, I got, poison mist thrown about me because the Super Black Ninja and TNT and Mr. Pogo were all ganging up on me and they hit me with a cane and whatever. Or, the Sea Predators were interviewed and they came in and destroyed the set. Like, my God. And then, the Super Medics came in and saved us all from them. Hold on.
It's still very real.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's still, it's very real. It's very real to them. So they would bring in these amazing feuds and stories with them to hype up the match that was going to happen in order to draw these people. These, they're ready to go. They're ready to kill the foreigner that just came in and told them they're worthless and that the American way is going to triumph over these filthy Indians in this backwards colony, and you're all coming here to pay booze to see me. That kind of stuff. It really got them pissed off, and it really moved a lot of people. Of course, it helps that they got all the booze in there. So,
yep.
If really to answer your question, um, the story, the booking, that's what drives the fans to the Coliseums or whatever other place you want to name. The baseball stadiums, the basketball courts. That's what really drove them, and the star power from these characters drove them too.
Well, thank you for answering that. Yeah, and I just wanted to say earlier about Puerto Rico's psyche. Puerto Rico is unlike any place in the Caribbean by the fact that its special status as a Commonwealth of the United States gives it both an American perspective and a Spanish-speaking perspective that often clashes, but we're not going to get into that. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting place, and people should visit it, and people should research it. It's very beautiful place.
So you're saying go if I ever get the chance to go?
Yes, go. And if you're American
Definitely.
and an American, no passport, no nothing. So yep, it's a good place to go if you want to go to the beach or just see jungles or just take in the sun. It's a great place. You want to see some wrestling?
It's definitely safer than Mexico. I'll tell you that.
Go
Yes.
go watch violent ass wrestling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to see some good wrestling, there's still plenty of wrestling. IWA is still running, Capital's still running. I know they're running to the west of the island or to the middle of it or to the mid north. They're still running. They'll still got their company. Or if you want to see something that is kind of like the Puerto Rican interpretation, then go watch the LAWE. But I don't know if they're still running around. I think they might be. They just might have gone a little quiet. Because they're putting some stuff up.
Yeah. Anyway, let's continue.
Sure. All right. Where were we? The mid '80s, right?
Mid '80s. Yep.
All right. So okay, we'll move on to the late '80s now because that's where the thing gets
crazy.
That's where it all. Yeah.
So a lot of things happen all at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. I want to say, I think '87 was the last normal year for them, really, because if you think about it, that's pretty much the year they turned Invader back babyface by the end of it. And they had the super anniversary show where he feuded with Chicky in a hair versus mask match. And this is before Invader decided to just take his mask off and never wear it again before the trial. Because everybody knew his face, which really ruined the character. Because the guy is not pretty to look at. And that mask is pretty iconic, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
I think I still have the one that I bought as a kid. But yeah, so Invader number one had become, I think, a face by the end of the '87 year. '88 rolls around. We're still doing pretty strong, but for some reason around towards the summer, the houses started going down. It was really weird, but then they went back up. Okay, fine, whatever. At this time, if you want to know, things are getting a little weird economically in Puerto Rico. The industry boom is starting to slow down. The '80s are winding down. Of course, everybody knows about the depression that we almost hit in '89, but then it was like, oh no, wait, it's a recession. Sorry.
session.
You know, the economy here walks along with the American economy. So things were
Yeah,
winding down. Things were the territories were dead by then. Uh, Crockett had pretty much swallowed up UWF, if I
UWF
recall.
Mid South. Yeah, yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Houston,
yeah.
Houston.
Crockett bought a shit ton of territories except one,
yeah.
but did not
Well,
He didn't.
see a
Yeah,
return
If
on
I recall,
investment.
yeah.
yeah,
Crockett bought Championship Wrestling for Florida, UWF, and
yeah,
WCCW was still going along, but it was kind of dying at the late '80s because
yeah.
all the
Because
scandals of this.
what happened was AWA bought Detroit and Chicago. They bought they brought Illinois and Michigan, and then they bought the rest of the Midwest. They bought Missouri. So AWA had like this Midwestern empire. I think up north you still had what fucking Washington, Seattle wrestling or whatever it was called, or Baltimore. I can't
No,
remember.
no, no. You're thinking of Portland wrestling.
Yeah, there you go, Portland.
you're,
Because
you're
I know that one
confusing
because
Portland and Mid
Piper used to.
Atlantic.
Yeah, there you go. Because Portland was where Piper and I think Raven even said he worked there at some point, but it was a pretty miserable territory by the end. Um, so yeah, they had a Midwestern kind of empire. Arizona was never really a thing, so they bought that territory too. Texas was still a holdout, but it was fading away real fast with the Von Erichs family too,
Well, yeah.
unfortunately.
Also, let me expand on that as somebody who's a Texan and who also is
Yeah,
deep into the history of Texas wrestling. The Funk territory, the Amarillo territory, Western States Promotion had folded up. They'd sold it to some guys. I think some I can't remember. Maybe it was Black Bart or something. They ran it into the ground. It died. The El Paso territory had pretty much the Guerrero family territory in El Paso pretty much went kaput. The Guerreros were either working in Mid South or Jim Crockett, or they're working in Mexico or EMLL. And Houston wrestling, once Paul Bosch had retired, it pretty
I
much
was
died on the vine and just
yeah,
completely kaput. So the only and Southwest Championship, the Tully Blanchard's father, Joe Blanchard's promotion, had pretty much gone kaput, and then some successors would come on, just kind of like how Memphis would as well. And then World Class was still there, and they were very popular. Let's not get it, because they had, people forget, they had a national TV deal with Christian Broadcasting Network. They were very popular across the nation, but the constant deaths, scandals, the
yeah.
the fake the
That didn't
fake
help.
Von Erich, that pretty much almost killed the Terry. That fake Von Erich was terrible.
Yeah, I would feel betrayed too. I don't blame them really for turning their
Yeah,
backs. I
yeah.
wish they would. It would have had it been a lot better managed and had the tragedies that circled that family around. From Kevin to the Jack. What was it? Jack Jr. Dad died because he drowned in a puddle after being
No,
knocked out. But
he got electrocuted to death in a
yeah, there
puddle.
you go. Yeah,
Very terrible way
yeah.
to go.
Had those tragedies just never happened, I mean, we'd probably be talking about the Von Erichs in Texas still.
Yeah.
So of course, there was also the Calgary purchases and stuff, and Stu Hart sold off the territory, and that's a whole other thing. But yeah, so the territories by then were faded away. The NWA was shadow its former self, and relegated to the dustbin of history by the start of the '90s. Uh, and of course, a lot of those guys had nowhere else to go, so they would go under contract in WCW, which at that time was Crockett still. The Georgia Championship Wrestling had been bought by McMahon, but they didn't buy WCW, so technically they still had the brand. Yeah. So, and of course, we were seeing more New York. We were seeing more WWF down here too. Every now and then WWF would do a tour and they would stop by Puerto Rico, but they never really captured everybody. Well, except that one time Roddy Piper almost started a goddamn riot, but that's
Wait,
that's
what?
another story. Yeah, no, that's
You're
another
gonna
story.
have to tell that now.
No, we'll
We'll
we'll,
we'll
we'll, we'll tell that at another time.
we'll
Uh,
tell that. I'll tell that by the end of the 80 by 89.
all right,
I'll keep it like that.
all right, all right.
Hey,
So, um, when 88 rolls around, um, the business here is well, we're having a lot more foreigners. We're having a lot more Tony Atlases. We're having a lot more, Dutch. Well, Dutch was always a mainstay. Still a freaking awesome old man.
Still,
Yosemite Sam.
and if any of you watch his podcast, he always has great things to say about Puerto Rico, the
Yeah.
people. And
And well,
you wouldn't expect that because Dutch Mantel was almost causing riots. He was calling people very nasty names in Puerto Rico, just like yeah,
he's
he's
had
great.
so much stuff thrown at him, even towards when in the 2000s.
Yeah, he's a Puerto Rico legend for sure.
He
Um,
is.
Throwing
Sure.
spark plugs at people, like
yeah,
We'll play one last rib on Dutch. We'll make him a statue, but it'll be a Yosemite Sam statue, and we'll
yeah, because
have
he does look like Yosemite Sam. That's true.
yeah.
Now see here,
It'll be
Yes.
one last-
there, boy. Now you
But yeah,
Yankees better not leave that ballpark, or I'm gonna blast you.
yeah. So okay, so 88 rolls around, and I think the month of I want to say July, which we actually got. It wasn't the anniversary, but it's not like a big Jubilee anniversary, kind of like 30 years or something like that. But whatever. July rolls around. Business has been kind of average. Brody had come in the month before, I think, and he had stayed for as long as he could. A lot of the guys that sometimes talk about this story also talk about the fact that Brody might have been interested in buying a stake here. We don't know if that is true 100% yet. It's never really probably going to be proven, unfortunately, because we didn't have.
Records to that.
Yeah, no, we don't have records of that. We don't have records of conversation. We don't have any of that stuff,
Yeah, it's
unfortunately.
all hearsay. But I would say it's very possible because he was working a lot in Puerto Rico during that time. So I think he might have thought, let me get a piece of this place.
Well,
It's
part of the impetus, from what I've gathered around the years, and from what a lot of people have told me, is that Brody had burned down his bridges with Japan after he jumped to New Japan, and it really hurt Baba because Baba and Brody had done business for a long time, and Baba fucking hates the hell out of Inoki and his style.
that's very well known. Yeah.
Yeah. And Inoki hates the shit out of Baba because when Inoki traveled over here to the States, Inoki was wrestling in much shows. Meanwhile, Baba was getting all the big name show cards and stuff.
That's one reason, but also, during the dying days of JWA, Inoki wanted a coup, right? And he got Baba to sort of agree to help him because Baba was the biggest star, right, in the JWA.
Yeah.
He kind
Yeah,
of got him to agree to do a coup and take over the corrupt because JWA was being run as like a piggy bank for these guys. It wasn't really
it was run. Yeah, it was being run by the Japanese mafia.
A lot
it's
of
being run as
legitimate.
like a slut,
I think you mean legitimate businessmen.
as they call them over there.
Sure.
We'll call
Oh.
it that. Yeah. Oh, hello, Korst.
Yeah. I did want to interrupt because it was getting really. I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah. But
I was gonna. Sorry for interrupting, but I was gonna say another factor was also in the JWA training. Like say in the gyms and whatnot, most of the wrestlers had like simple beds, while Baba was given basically first class in comparison.
Yeah, because it was
Again,
super.
he had that established stardom through baseball ahead of time.
Yeah. And also, as I was saying earlier, Baba had kind of sort of agreed to do this coup with Inoki, and it's like, but Inoki's manager was like really corrupt and not really trustworthy, and then he found out about it. It's like, hell no, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. And then Inoki got kicked out of the JWA, looked like a fool, and that's why he started New Japan. So, that's where the heat comes from. Pretty much.
Yeah, that's pretty much where it comes from, if I recall. Yeah, and the mafia connection really never that never stopped until pretty recently.
They've cracked down hard on the Yakuza in Japan.
Yeah, that's for the better, frankly. But
if you played sorry for interrupting, if you played the more recent Yakuza games, you would actually know that.
Yeah. Anyway.
It's funny because then you've got actual wrestlers in the Yakuza game, but that's another story for another time.
Yeah.
So now let me see if I can remember the lead up to this. Brody had burned down his bridges in Japan. The territories were all but gone. Texas had died. Brody had been the booker there, but he had also down his bridges there. So he was really hard to work with. And there was a period. Yeah, there was a period. What?
There's a theme there. This man loves burning the bridge.
No, well, again, he was tough to work at because he wanted to be a big star. He wanted to draw a lot of money, but he didn't want to deal with the bookers bullshit. He didn't want to deal with the promoters bullshit of stiffing him in the pay and getting a percentage.
Yeah.
I think that's why he would agree with the business today. He just doesn't agree with the methodology or the amount of money that you're making. But again, different story. So Brody, according to some, had come in to New York a few years back when Jose was still working as an undercard guy. Now, apparently, Jose had caught Brody in a really bad mood and had done or said some stuff that had pretty much angered him. And Brody pretty much stiffed him in the ring. Now, Jose had other problems with management and with other Puerto Rican stars because, like I said, he was jealous of Johnny because he got to work Andre. And that, of course, led up to them being a six-man team eventually, but Jose was always kept to the side. And he was really angry at the fact that, everybody else had gotten to be a big star, but he didn't get to be anything. He had gotten to just be some jabroni. So he comes to the island, becomes a big star. Now he's got an inflated ego. And the worst thing you could have in the wrestling business here is an inflated ego because people will start to fucking get pissed off and, the things will happen.
Also, sorry to interrupt, but wasn't Jose also the booker at this point? One of the bookers at this point?
Yeah, correct. He's one of the best bookers.
Yeah. So an
along
inflated ego and a booker, yeah, that always goes great.
Oh God.
Yeah, along with Carlos and Victor, who were in charge of not only booking the big foreign stars but also helping them get around the island. So the lead up to this goes as follows: the guy in charge of driving a lot of these guys around, I think, was a referee by the name of Victor Jovica.
You mean Victor Quinones?
No, sorry, Victor Quinones. My bad.
Yep.
So Victor was a referee at the time, friends with Savio. They came up in the business, I guess, together. Although I think Victor might have been a little bit earlier than he did.
Yeah.
The entire time when Brody's around, there's been a lot of tension with Invader throughout the last month. Now, Invader has always claimed that he had a tragedy in his life in '87 where his daughter died. She drowned in a pool. She was a baby. That is true. There is evidence of that. Now, it has never been quite known if that was a contributing factor to him stabbing him in the locker room or not.
I would have to not believe that because Bruiser Brody had nothing to do with that. So
no, of course, but you have to understand. There's other
Grief
stories that
makes
have gone
people do
around.
wild things.
yeah. Grief makes people do wild things. Yeah, I can understand that, but it doesn't look like that.
Yeah, but there's another side to
currently
this.
mourning.
Yeah, there's another side to this, of course. There is some alleged, words from, I think it was Hugo Savinovich, who was asked, what's the deal with Brody and the stabbing and everything? And he said, Brody was apparently owed some serious amount of money. He wanted to buy into the territory, but he wanted the money back, and he wanted to have a certain amount of say, and he wanted to be a big star here. So he said, okay, if I'm going to be a big star, then I want to have the book, and I want to fucking have Invader fucking gone to hell because he's been a pain in the ass. He doesn't like to work with me, and he doesn't like to work with a lot of people. I'm guessing Invader saw that as a threat to his position. Now, there's also been allegations that Carlos and Victor had apparently might have ordered Invader to say, okay, we need to get rid of him, and you want to get rid of him, so we'll scratch each other's back. And apparently the jury was paid off, and the judge was paid off in order to let Invader off the hook. Sorry.
Well,
Um,
there's definitely some
yeah,
miscarriages of justice going on in the trial
yeah,
because the foreign wrestlers literally who were witness to this got summons after the trial happened. There's definitely that
right.
judge was
Oh yeah.
definitely paid off or something like there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
correct. So there was something shady with the trial.
And,
Um, one of the people that gets disgusted by this is Victor Jovica. Another one that's pretty disgusted by this is Savio, but he really can't say much because he just started and he just got a major push.
yep.
Um, and he would get a major push later on in like the early '90s when they put the strap on him,
Mhm.
and it pretty much ended the territory, the golden age of the territory. I mean,
Yeah,
88 was
yeah, because
88 was already. I mean, it was already shaping up to be a pretty rough year, but 89 was when it just died. It just looked like the '90s.
well, yeah, there's a lot of contributing factors to that, but from what I've understood, from what a lot of the American wrestlers who worked there at the time, they said there was pretty much a no-fly list to Puerto Rico. Like they were not going back to WWC because unless Invader had left or was killed, and there has been stories that if Invader ever came back to the United States, because I don't think he's ever come back to the United States, that he was going to get killed for that. You
He
know,
went. He went one time for Florida, and it was among a bunch of Puerto Ricans. He never worked anybody that wasn't either Puerto Rican or Mexican.
yeah. So he
And that
definitely,
that was really that was really recently, by the way.
yeah. So, and a lot of the guys have said, well, we're not going to go there anymore because they killed Brody and they goddamn got away with it. So, you know,
Yeah.
and
Like
if
a lot of them lived up to the word.
a lot of them
I'll
didn't
admit,
either. Yeah.
a lot of them did. A lot of them didn't, unfortunately. But I won't have that against them because there was a period in time because Invader had been tried, the business had gone down. The entire year of '89 was capital restructuring, which was just code for we're bankrupt because this motherfucker ruined the capital name, so we're going to have to reinvent ourselves as WWC. That's where the
Yep.
name comes from.
Yeah.
Because
World
they used
Wrestling
to have
Council.
they used to have World Wrestling Council underneath the Capital Sports, and it said World Capital Sports presents WWC. There you go.
Yeah. So they just
Uh,
changed the name.
yeah, they just changed the name, kind of like WCW did, but because of the murder. So, the murder
if
weapon was never found. Invader was tried, found quote unquote innocent,
In self
and
defense.
in self defense, still claims that it's
bullshit,
self defense.
if
Um, yeah.
Oh, keep
guns
going.
were
All right. So, the '90s roll around, and this is when things get pretty rough. Now, there had been a previous split before, but never like the one that AWF did, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah, no. Um, Hugo Savinovich had, I think, been a very mediocre kind of star. He really
Oh,
never really reached anything.
all
He,
right.
he was, he was, yeah,
All right.
sorry.
Sorry. Before to interrupt you, Hugo Savinovich, for people who don't know, people will probably know him as the ex WWE Spanish commentator. He works for
Yeah.
AAA now. He runs his Lucha Libre online, which engages a lot of clickbait in Spanish. Whatever.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
so great.
yeah. He's very well known as an announcer, a translator. You know, not really as a wrestler, but he was very involved in Puerto Rico before he went to AAA. Yeah. So, yeah, just wanted to give some background on that person.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. I forgot to give the background. But
No
Hugo,
problem.
Hugo had started out in New York. He had wrestled up there in the territory for just a little bit. He was just a jobber to the stars. Started off relatively young, but he was connected to the underworld, unfortunately, throughout his life, according to him. And later on, I think he would get addicted to certain drugs, and that would caused some friction among a lot of people in the business. But that's neither here nor there. Now, by the early 90s, the business had gone down. The houses were really down. Capital had brought in some new no-name foreigners, one of which was really interesting. This guy never really gets brought up a lot anymore in America, probably because he's not known, but down here he was really super known. It's a guy by the name of Sadistic Steve Strong. And this dude, I mean, he was jacked, like ridiculously jacked. And he had been brought in to feud with Carlos because he was just, I mean, he was a goddamn meatball. But they had given him this gimmick of he was an actual legitimate Satanist. He had like the 666 shaved into his like the sides of his hair. He had like a metal kind of armband thing where it looked like one of those like big leather stud things that you see the heavy metal stars wear.
Mhm.
He had long hair and he looked really nuts, and he had like the eye contacts or whatever in one of the eyes to make him look like he was nuts. He came out to the number of the beast, and here is Puerto Rico, this really conservative Catholic nation, and he's he's pretty much being brought in to kind of feud with him, and throughout the entire year, that was pretty much the only thing they were banking on. They were bringing in Steve Strong to try and kind of get that foreigner formula back in, and it sort of worked. A lot of people really liked Steve. Had he come into the 80s, he would have probably been a really bigger name, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. And so
Yeah,
Carlos pretty
unfortunately,
much
there
stuck.
is always that right place at the wrong time scenarios in wrestling, unfortunately.
But he'd be very important because he would start a trend on the island where there would be a lot of satanic characters. Later on, this would really kick into high gear with Kane and The Undertaker because a lot of people really loved this gimmicks. They liked the whole satanic, monster thing. But there
Got
would be
people
somebody
doing
else on.
You got people doing blood sacrifices in the ring.
Yeah, that we'll touch on that guy later on. But um, Steve would pretty much be the pioneer for that kind of stuff. He'd kind of be our answer to Kevin Sullivan, but without the whole promo stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, 91, 92 rolls around and the AWF split. Hugo leads the charge along with Victor Jovica
Even
and a
Victor
bunch of.
Quinones.
Victor Quinones. Sorry,
Yeah, no
again,
problem.
get those two confused because of the Victor part.
Yeah.
So, I'll make it easier for myself. I'll just say Quinones.
Yeah,
So
sounds good.
Hugo and Quinones make the AWF. They call in a bunch of people from their respective phone books. And they also bring in a lot of WC stars, mainstay guys, too. They call in the Invaders, number 2 and number 3. They call in, I think, Dr. Death Steve Williams is one of the guys they started out, but never really came back. The British Bulldog, when he got let go, came here and wrestled for a little bit. Yeah, there's even a videotape. They wanted to put the title on Hurricane Castillo Jr. because he was one of the better workers, and they wanted to focus more on wrestling.
I want to give, speaking of Hurricane Castillo Jr., guys, there's a match. I think it's one of Hector Guerrero's only matches in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
With him versus Hurricane Castillo. It's very good. You should all watch it because Hector's a general in the ring, and Hurricane Castillo is a young up-and-comer, and he's giving it all he's got. It's a really good match. It's a really good match. It's kind of like that high-flying style. I just want to give that a shout-out.
Hurricane, and back in his day, that was pre-2000s Hurricane Castillo. That was... he was the second generation. He was junior. His dad had been a very major heel here in the territory. He grew up and saw that and said, I want to be just like my dad, but he was a much better wrestler. Better wrestler. Personality-wise, not his dad, but he definitely carved out a really good, top of the mid-card kind of guy position. He's the guy that you work with to get to the top.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the other guy that had been on tour throughout the late 80s and early 90s had come back, was the son of just an absolute ring general and, frankly, one of the best wrestlers to ever come out of the New York and Puerto Rican, territories. A guy by the name of Jose Miguel Perez Sr., but his junior, Jose Miguelito, as they call him, which is the diminutive.
Yeah, just
Miguelito. Yeah, Miguelito.
Miguelito. And when somebody, just to explain, I'm not a native Spanish speaker, but when somebody has ito at the end of it, it means little. Like
Yeah.
Paraguayo Jr. got called Perito a lot.
Yeah.
That means little dog. Just
Yeah.
little.
Boy, and I still miss Perito. But yeah,
Perito.
Yeah. Perito, yeah. So, yes, so those two teamed up as sort of a tag team. They were the Caribbean Express, kind of an early version of the Los Boricuas, if you think about it.
Yep.
They were probably
Oh,
one of
right,
the
Proto
best
Boricuas.
tag teams. Yeah, pretty much Proto Boricuas. So one of the best tag teams of the 90s. They were second generation. They had it all. Miguel might have looked like a goddamn grizzly bear with all the hair on his body.
He is definitely the hairiest man on the island. Like that man,
Definitely.
he's definitely the hairiest man in the island of Puerto Rico.
You have no idea, and all that hair never went away. His head went bald before all that hair went away. That's the amazing part. And still to this day, he wrestles with a shirt on because he just doesn't want to show off that cashmere sweater.
I know.
So yes, him. He had it all. I mean, he had the size, he had the ability. Speaking wise, he wasn't the best promo guy, but he could goddamn go with anybody. I mean, he was just a machine. He was the second coming of his dad. He goes to Mexico and he becomes a star. He goes to Japan and he trains there. Doesn't stay for too long, so he doesn't really become a big star. But they really liked him in Mexico. Another guy that they take, and I forgot to say this in the 80s because he's actually a pretty important part of that. Let me rewind the clock real quick. Chicky Star had found this one dude by the name of Victor Rodriguez, whose son I had the chance of training under for a little bit. And I really liked him. The guy's great. His name's Noel. So Victor, I might have doxed myself a little bit with that, but I'm not gonna go back on that one. So Victor Rodriguez, better known as Victor the Bodyguard, is very famous for being Chicky Star's personal bodyguard throughout his promos. If you ever seen him in the Chicky Star Sports Shop promos, doing stuff with Abby or Stan Hanson, he's in the background wearing glasses and some sort of polo shirt, like an actual security guard.
Doing bodyguard pose.
Yeah, exactly. During the cross-arm bodyguard pose, pretty big guy. He was doing the whole, Bubba, Big Boss Man thing before Big Boss Man.
Okay.
So he was pretty much the prelude to that, and he would later on go to AWF with those guys and become something of an up-and-coming star. Everybody already knew him, but he was known for these really crazy brawls that would sometimes spill into the concession stands or outside the goddamn street because, frankly, he wasn't that great of a wrestler, technically speaking, but he was a great brawler and a good big man to have around. Much better in tag teams later on, but we'll get to that. So, there is a point in AWF where they're starting out, they have some really strong houses, but it all falls apart. Quinones has some disagreements with Hugo. Hugo really doesn't want to deal with this because he wants to go to Mexico and do some other stuff. Jovica also wants to go to Mexico, but he'll go later because now he has to go to Japan and go work with Onita and FMW and do this other stuff.
Is where he gets legendary.
Oh,
that's where he starts to get legendary. He becomes a connection over there. And we'll get
in Japan is pretty effing big.
Victor, actually, if you think about it, he's a little bit like Paulie in Japan.
But he's like the Puerto Rican Paulie. Like if you guys have ever I want to give a recommendation to anybody if you want to learn a little bit more about this. Watch Brett's History of FMW. He'll talk a lot about this. He's the Puerto Rican connection. He brings in guys like the Headhunters, Jason the Terrible, the Puerto Rican one.
The not shit one.
Yeah, Mr. Pogo, stuff like that. He's bringing them all in, and they're getting good payments in in FMW Wing and then IWA Japan.
Yeah, I gotta give Brett credit for that. I didn't know too much about his time in Japan, but I really got to educate myself on his period of time and how much of a valuable resource he was. I mean, he was pretty much the connection for a lot of those Puerto Rican and Japanese or American guys, or a lot of the Mexican guys later on too, when he would do Wing or IWA Japan or FNW when he would come back one last time and then leave. So
Yep.
he goes to Japan. We'll come back to him in a minute because we have to cover the mid 90s. So everybody from AWF that was native to the island pretty much goes back to Capital. The ones that don't really just stay as independent guys. There's some point in the 90s where a lot of those guys just become independent wrestlers. You know, they'll wrestle in bars, they'll wrestle in smaller venues, you know, stuff like that. They might not make a lot of money if at all, but
Oh, hell,
it's
we'll
a
wrestle
very
in your
important.
barn.
Yeah, exactly. The smaller, you know, basketball courts, you know, the open air ones that everybody can go and watch with their kids. That's what I'm talking about. We still have a lot of that. It's somewhere to discover new talent or for new talent to, you know, make themselves be known and develop and grow as wrestlers.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Also, during this time, Savio went to the WWF, correct? As Quang at first, right?
correct. So, okay. So, Savio Vega gets a call apparently from WWF up there. They pretty much offer him a deal to come in and wrestle. So they give him a tryout. He goes. They say, "Okay, you're good enough. Let's go. Let's do the TNT thing. But we're going to call you Quang,
Quang
and we're going to
remains.
give you a match." Yeah, because at that time, it, according to him at least, it was a lot more marketable, and that way he didn't have to sell the TNT name to them because they get your stuff if you sign with your
Yeah.
original.
Oh yeah.
And that actually becomes another thing in Puerto Rico later on, but we'll get to that again. That when we reach IWA. So he works as Quang. He meets Taker. He meets Yokozuna. He meets what's his name? The Godwins.
Rikishi.
Rikishi was I think he wasn't
God.
around just yet.
Yeah,
He
the
was
Godfather.
at that point Rikishi was the Sultan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see,
Yeah.
Godfather would have been, was he Kaba Mustafa at this point? The Supreme Fighting Machine? Or was he Papa Shango?
Yeah.
Not
I
yet,
think
I
it's Papa
think.
Shanga.
That was when he was
Shanga.
95, I believe.
Hey, listen, I'll be right back. Hold on.
Yeah, no
Okay.
problem. Yeah, that's BSK, the other backstage faction in WWF. They're kind of legendary.
If I recall, they were famous for playing dominoes.
Playing dominoes. You know, Taker, if you've ever seen Taker wrestle,
Wait,
he has
wait,
that
Boris.
BSK tattoo. Yeah,
Boris, real quick, I'm going to stop the recording and I'm going to start it again.
yeah, no problem.
All right, so I'm going to stop the